Hello! So in today's video, I'm going to show you a little bit about how Among Us works in its 3D engine. That's right, the game does run in 3D, although there are no 3D objects. So you're going to be seeing a lot of 2D layers in a 3D space. And there might be one or two little out-of-bounds discoveries as well. But anyways, why don't we get ourselves ejected and start showing you what you can find out of bounds in Among Us. And playing off of that reference a second ago, why don't we actually talk about the ejection screen? So after enough votes are made, the character is ejected from the game, and it shows this little screen here of your character floating through space on at least this map. And taking the camera outside the boundaries will show you that this screen is actually just being projected much further away from the ship itself. It is the topmost layer, but it also has a sizable distance between where this screen is and where the players are currently waiting to continue their game. And then for the second map, you might remember that the character just falls through the sky and past the clouds. And there's a couple layers being used here. There's one for the darkness that leads into the text. There's another layer for all the clouds. And then there's a separate layer for the sky background. Then for the final map that's currently available at this time, your character falls into a pit of lava. Now what's really cool here is that there's going to be an animation where your character tries to spring up out of the lava, but before that even happens, you can see a small indication of the character in a tiny sliver. I actually talked to one of the developers in a Twitter DM, and he explained that the reason why this happens is because there's a mask covering up that animation. And even he found it a little bit odd that if I moved the camera in a certain angle, you can still see that sprite. And here's a last minute update to this. The cam maker, Tran Fox, thank you so much for making this camera by the way, updated the camera to remove that masking layer. And so here's what that animation looks like without any masking layer covering it up whatsoever. As for the dropship, this uses layers as well. You can see here the foreground layer with the boxes are on a completely separate layer from the ship, and that the flames used for the propulsion is also on a separate layer. And if you move the camera in certain ways, you can actually clip it through the ship itself, and you can see the artwork that's supposed to be underneath, which you are able to see in other maps. Clothing attire is also on separate layers, as you can see in the same clip, because when you move it in certain spots, my dirty clothing seems to clip through the character, showing its bare body, and that the hat also clips through, showing the top of the head, where the hat would normally cover up. And that becomes even more apparent with the character customizer. For whatever reason, while you're customizing your character, the clothing that gets layered on top of your character model is positioned much further away than the character itself. And also, once again, here's the distance between that and the ship itself to give you some depth perception. Also, that darkness when you're walking around inside the ship. Did you know that that's not just simply an effect, it's also a texture that follows the player. It's like a HUD, and it has levels of opacity and everything, and from far away you can see the exact square space that the developers used as your character's walking around. Also, that shadow square is the only thing that's hiding other crewmates in other rooms. If the camera could see past the black square, you can see here that the crewmate would not be called out, and in fact you'd be able to see them perfectly. And before we move on to the other maps, I do want to do a couple of viewer requests. As always, you can follow me on Twitter if you ever want to see what I'm up to, make a request for a game, or just find out what the next game is. Alright, let's start rattling them off. They're not going to all be perfect, but they answer a lot of questions, okay? So, some people want to know what happens to the lasers after they fire from the ship. And as you can see here, the lasers don't really fire off into the distance. It just kind of stays with the ship itself. Another one was to see the security cameras from another angle. And this one's pretty interesting. There's many layers for this. First of all, the camera footage is on a separate layer from the monitor, and the keyboard and desk is on a separate layer from the monitor as well. And then much to my surprise, there's a separate texture for the snow on the screens that are behind the monitor. Definitely one of the most complex looking scenes. And then somebody wanted to know how the vents work. Now I did contact the developer Forrest yet again, and he informed me that there is no masking used here, but instead it's frame by frame animation of the sprite. So you're not going to find his body hidden anywhere, not after or during the scene where he goes into the vent. Nothing like that, sad to say, but of course we just need to talk about it because people were curious. But now that we got the viewer requests out of the way, let's talk about some interesting stuff. This is actually kind of the catalyst for the entire episode. Again, one of the developers decided to share a little tidbit on their Twitter profile, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I didn't think there would be anything like that in Among Us. And the thing that he showed off was that there's apparently a crewmate inside one of the bathroom stalls on the third map, which is usually incredibly hard to notice. But if you tilt the camera, you can see the crewmate in full. And while we're on this map, why don't we tilt it around and show you what it looks like all in one shot. Lots and lots of layers here used for the mountains and everything else. The sky background, it's pretty impressive. And then here's a little discovery I made on my own. Apparently the dropship that you use in the second map is always closed off to the player, even if you're a ghost. But the way the developers kind of cut some corners here and made sure that the art design of it was consistent was that they still used the same dropship that you kept seeing throughout the entire game. The only difference is that they added a layer of the exterior of the ship and placed it on top of the ship itself. So if we tilted the camera behind it, you can see the interior of the ship. And you can also see a little bit of evidence that the layer is stacked on top of the ship itself, because there's a little bit of a gap between the ship itself and the layer that's covering it up. Also, take a look at this over here. Normally these two crewmates have a cookie cut that hides their entire bodies, but here you can see the entire artwork for both. And yeah, anyways, in the same map, there's a layer dedicated to clouds, and something that I found really interesting about the clouds is that for some reason, on the first frame or 2 frames, the clouds are a little bigger than the developers intended, and so they shrink down to the appropriate size. But yeah, if we slow the footage down, you can see it go from bigger to smaller. Anyways, here's a zoom out of the second map, so you can see it in all its glory. Also, here's what the kill screen looks like from another angle. Once again, you can see that it's placed much, much further apart from the map itself. And that's it. I know there wasn't much for Among Us, but I appreciate you watching. And just to keep you guys informed, YouTube's been messing with my channel since August. They changed something drastically with it, and now only subscribers are really getting shown my videos. So if you're not subscribed and you see this video and you want to see more, subscribing to the channel will mean that you'll probably have about a 1 in 14 chance of YouTube promoting the next video to you. I appreciate everybody that took the time to watch, and the next video will be a much bigger, longer one. Take care, everybody.